Imagine a war where victory isn't measured by land captured or cities liberated. It is measured in flesh. Flesh weighed, counted, and logged into a ledger. In the jungles of Vietnam, American officers literally demanded severed ears as proof of kills. Why? Because a man in a tailored suit in Washington needed the math to balance. Welcome to the Psyche of Power. This is Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, IQ off the charts, former president of Ford Motors. He didn't see a war. He saw a math problem. And this is the story of how the smartest man in the room engineered the most catastrophic psychological trap in modern military history. We are taught that evil is passionate, that tyrants foam at the mouth. But history proves otherwise. The most dangerous men do not wield machetes. They wield spreadsheets. McNamara brought corporate optimization to the slaughterhouse. Today, we will dissect the McNamara fallacy, a cognitive trap so profound that it not only lost the Vietnam War, but is currently running your life through social media algorithms. You think data is objective. By the end of this video, you will realize that data is the ultimate liar. Act 1. The God of Numbers. To understand the disaster, we must psychoanalyze the architect. McNamara was a whiz kid, a master of statistical control. He saved the U.S. Army Air Force's millions in WWI through logistical math. He saved Ford Motors from bankruptcy through ruthless accounting. In psychology, there is a concept called Kaplan's law of the instrument. It states, give a small boy a hammer, and he will find that everything he encounters needs pounding. McNamara's hammer was quantitative analysis. He believed anything that could not be measured simply did not exist. When he took over the Pentagon, he looked at Vietnam and applied the exact same metrics he used to sell cars, inputs and outputs. If we drop X amount of bombs, we kill Y amount of Viet Cong, achieving Z amount of pacification. He treated human beings like predictable variables in a sterile lab experiment. But the jungle is not a laboratory. You cannot put nationalism into a calculator. You cannot quantify a peasant's willingness to die for their homeland. McNamara suffered from severe epistemic arrogance, the hubris of believing his models perfectly mirrored reality. He ordered the military to track everything: artillery shells fired, weapons recovered, pacified villages. But the ultimate metric, the golden KPI of the Vietnam War, was the body count. If the American forces killed more enemies than they lost, they were mathematically winning. Here is where the psychology gets dark. When you tie a soldier's promotion, his leave time, and his commander's career to a specific metric, you trigger a deadly psychological phenomenon. It is an extreme manifestation of Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. If body count is the only way to prove success, then producing dead bodies becomes the sole purpose of the organization, not winning the war, just producing corpses. The psychological pressure on the troops was immense. Officers demanded high kill counts to please their superiors. Platoons were given quotas, a quota for killing. Think about the psychological cognitive dissonance required to process that. You are no longer a soldier protecting democracy. You are a grim reaper on commission. And here is the first cognitive twist of our story. By making body count the ultimate truth, McNamara didn't just measure the war. He fundamentally mutated it. If you need bodies to get a promotion, and you can't find Viet Cong fighters, who do you kill? The infamous Mirguk rule emerged. If it's dead and Vietnamese, it's Viet Cong. The data demanded bodies, so the soldiers supplied them. Women, children, they were all logged as enemy combatants. The data was perfect. The reality was a war crime. In Washington, McNamara looked at the graphs. The lines were going up. The body count was staggering. By all mathematical logic, the Viet Cong should have been wiped out 3 times over. The spreadsheet said America was winning. The spreadsheet was completely detached from reality. In modern behavioral psychology, there is a study by Choi, Het, and Taylor on a phenomenon called surrogation. Surrogation happens when a person's brain subconsciously substitutes the strategy, winning the ward, with the metric used to measure it, counting bodies. The military leadership suffered a mass, systemic cognitive failure. They forgot what victory actually looked like. They lost the ability to strategize because their brains were hijacked by the dopamine hit of hitting their daily KPI targets. They became addicts, and the drug was fraudulent data. McNamara's trap was set. He built an ecosystem where lying was rewarded and truth was punished. If an officer reported 0 kills because he peacefully secured a village, he was reprimanded for being lazy. If he blew up a farm and claimed 20 enemy kills, he got a medal. Act 2, the laboratoire. As the data flowed into Washington, the war escalated. More bomb, more spreadsheets. But McNamara failed to account for one crucial variable. The enemy had a mind of their own. McNamara viewed the Viet Cong as passive variables in his equation. If we apply X pain, they will reach Y breaking point. It is a psychological blind spot called the illusion of asymmetric insight. He thought he understood them perfectly, while assuming they couldn't possibly understand him. But the North Vietnamese leadership quickly realized what the Americans were doing. They saw the obsession with body counts. They saw the rigid, predictable patterns of a military run by corporate accountants. And so, they decided to weaponize McNamara's own data against him. Get ready for the second cognitive twist. The Viet Cong began to manipulate the algorithm. They understood that American commanders needed kills to justify their operations. So, the Viet Cong controlled the engagements. They dictated when and where the battles happened. They would engage, inflict casualties, and then vanish into the tunnels, intentionally leaving behind a few of their own dead. Why? To feed the American machine just enough data to make the U.S. commanders think their tactics were working, drawing them deeper into the jungle. The U.S. military would spend millions of dollars dropping bombs on empty coordinates, counting a few blood trails as massive victories. The Viet Cong fed the American statistical beast an illusion of success. They realized if your enemy is blinded by numbers, you don't fight their army. You hack their spreadsheet. While McNamara was reading data, the Vietnamese were reading human nature. They knew that in a war of attrition, math loses to morale. Ho Chi Minh famously said, "You can kill 10 of my men for every 1 I kill of yours, but even at those odds, you will lose and I will win." How do you put that quote into a spreadsheet? You can't. So McNamara's system literally deleted it from reality. This introduces our third psychological concept, the Ostrich Paradox, coined by psychologists Meyer and Cohn-Reither. The Ostrich Paradox explains why highly intelligent people ignore catastrophic risks. It's not because they are stupid. It's because if a threat lacks a quantifiable, familiar metric, the human brain simply refuses to process it. McNamara couldn't measure Vietnamese resolve, so his brain treated it as a non-existent variable. He also ignored the unquantifiable variables on his own side. He measured how many troops were deployed, but he didn't measure their morale. He measured the ton of bombs dropped, but he didn't measure the psychological decay of an army forced to commit atrocities. He measured the defense budget, but he couldn't measure the collapse of the American public's trust. The data said the machine was operating at peak efficiency, but the ghost in the machine, the human soul, was screaming in agony. The cognitive dissonance began to tear the military apart. Reports from the field became pure fiction. Platoons would capture a hill, count the bodies, and then abandon the hill the next day because holding territory wasn't a KPI. The war became an infinite loop of meaningless violence. Imagine the psychological horror of the grunt on the ground. You watch your best friend die to take a piece of dirt, just so a captain can log a number, and then you retreat. You are risking your life not for victory, but for accounting. This destroyed the psyche of the American soldier. This total loss of meaning led to the dark underbelly of the Vietnam War. Rampant drug abuse, heroin, fragging, where soldiers would literally assassinate their own overly ambitious officers with fragmentation grenades to avoid being sent on meaningless data. Gathering suicide missions. When the system demands a metric that costs human lives, and the goal is a lie, human beings will eventually rebel against the system. Fragging wasn't just murder. It was a brutal, psychological rejection of McNamara's spreadsheet by the very pawns he was moving. By 1967, reality could no longer be held back by the dam of false data. The numbers were perfect, but the country of South Vietnam was collapsing. The Viet Cong were everywhere. McNamara, the architect of this mathematical hell, finally began to crack. Act 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The hardest thing for a human mind to accept is that its core operating system is flawed. For McNamara, his entire identity was built on the infallibility of numbers. To admit the data was wrong was to admit his worldview was a lie. He began to suffer from profound internal conflict. In private memos, he started expressing doubts. He realized that the bombing wasn't breaking their will. He realized the body counts were inflated, fabricated. Useless. The god of numbers had been betrayed by his own religion. This is the ultimate tragedy of the data bias trap. It is a self-sealing reality. Once you build a bureaucracy entirely around false metrics, the bureaucracy will fight to the death to protect those metrics, even when the architect tries to tear it down. When McNamara finally told President Lyndon B. Johnson that the war was unwinnable, that the math was an illusion, he was ostracized. He was pushed out of the Pentagon. The machine he built rejected him because he stopped believing in the numbers. Shortly after his departure came the Tet Offensive in 1968. coordinated surprise attack by the Viet Cong on over 100 cities simultaneously. Mathematically, it was impossible. The data said the Viet Cong were decimated. The data was a lie. The American public watched their embassy in Saigon get attacked on live television. The cognitive shockwave broke the nation. You can lie to a spreadsheet for years, but you cannot lie to reality forever. Reality always audits the books, and the penalty is paid in blood. 58,000 Americans dead, over 2 million Vietnamese dead. Millions more traumatized, mutilated, poisoned by Agent Orange. All because a group of incredibly intelligent men convinced themselves that humanity could be reduced to a quantifiable data set. Decades later, in the documentary The Fog of War, an elderly, broken McNamara finally admitted his profound failure. He confessed, "We were wrong, terribly wrong," he realized. Too late. The supreme danger of rationalizing the irrational. He failed to grasp the complexity of human nature. You cannot chart love, hate, fear, or revenge when you try to force the fluid chaos of the human soul into the rigid boxes of a bureaucratic ledger. You do not create order. You create a meat grinder. Now, brace yourselves for the final cognitive twist. You might look back at McNamara and think, what an arrogant fool. You might think this is just a dark chapter of history, but you are wrong. We didn't learn a damn thing. McNamara's ghost didn't die in the jungles of Vietnam. It moved to Silicon Valley. It moved to Wall Street. It moved into the smartphone you are holding in your hand right now. We are living in the golden age of the McNamara fallacy. Think about it. How do modern social media algorithms measure success? Not by human happiness, not by societal progress. They measure engagement, watch time, clicks, likes, the modern equivalent of the body count. The algorithm doesn't care if the content makes you depressed, anxious, or radicalized. It doesn't care if it destroys democracies or fuels hatred. If you are staring at the screen, the data goes up. The spreadsheet says you are engaged. The spreadsheet says the platform is winning. We have replaced the abstract goal, human connection and access to information, with a concrete metric attention extraction. This is systemic surrogation on a global scale. The tech billionaires are the new whiz kids, sitting in their glass pentagons, worshipping the data. It's in our healthcare systems. Doctors are evaluated on patient turnover times and billing codes, not on actual healing. It's in our schools. Teachers are evaluated on standardized test scores, not on whether a child is actually learning to think critically. When education becomes about passing a test, it ceases to be education. When healthcare becomes about billing codes, it ceases to be healing. When war becomes about body counts, it becomes extermination. Goodhart's law is tearing our society apart at the seams. And now, we are handing the keys of our civilization over to artificial intelligence, an entity that literally only understands the world through data. AI is the ultimate manifestation of McNamara's dream. A pure, emotionless, calculating intelligence. But what happens when we give an AI a goal, and it optimizes for the metric while destroying the human context? If we program an AI to maximize economic output, and it realizes that human workers are inefficient variables, What will the spreadsheet tell it to do? We suffer from the same Ostrich Paradox. We are ignoring the existential risk because we cannot easily quantify the value of the human soul. We are building machines that measure our physical outputs, but are blind to our humanity. McNamara proved that high intelligence without profound wisdom is a weapon of mass destruction. He proved that logic, divorced from empathy, creates madness. He thought he could master the chaos of reality by putting it into a grid. Reality broke the grid. Philosophy teaches us that to be human is to be unquantifiable. The deepest truths of our existence, courage, love, sacrifice, grief, cannot be mathematically mapped. Any system that attempts to reduce us to numbers will inevitably resort to violence to make the numbers fit. The soldiers in Vietnam who refused to shoot civilians, the ones who threw away their quotas, they were not breaking the rules. They were protecting reality. They were protecting their humanity against a viral, mathematical psychosis. How do you escape the data bias trap in your own life? You have to become a cognitive insurgent. You have to start questioning the metrics you use to judge your own success. Your salary, your follower count, your grades, these are not you. They are surrogate metrics imposed upon you by a system that wants to control you. Stop optimizing your life for the spreadsheet. Stop living your life as if a middle manager in the sky is going to audit your body count when you die. The McNamara fallacy is a warning written in the blood of millions. It tells us that whenever power tries to measure the immeasurable, tragedy follows. The map is not the territory. The data is not the truth. History will remember Robert McNamara not as an evil man, but as a tragic figure. A man who built a prison of numbers, locked himself inside, and threw away the key, dragging 2 nations into the darkness with him. But history also remembers the Viet Cong peasant, who with nothing but a rifle and a belief in his homeland, broke the greatest mathematical war machine ever built. He proved that the human spirit cannot be quantified. As we move deeper into the algorithmic age, you must decide what you value. Will you worship the metric? Will you let the data dictate your worth, your politics, your truth, or will you embrace the unquantifiable chaos of being human? Because if we do not learn to look past the spreadsheet, if we do not learn to respect the ghost in the machine, our future will be nothing but a long, perfectly calculated march towards oblivion. The trap is always set. The allure of perfect control is intoxicating. The men in suits will always try to convince you that they have the formula for victory, for happiness, for peace. Do not trust them. Power always seeks to simplify. It seeks to categorize, to number, to count. Because what can be counted can be controlled. Your greatest defense against the psyche of power is your absolute refusal to be simplified. Listen to the rhythm of the modern world. It is the exact same ticking of McNamara's adding machine. It is the sound of humanity being processed into data. Click, swipe, grade, kill. Break the rhythm, demand the context. Look at the reality outside the frame. The stars cannot be counted, but they guide the way. The deep, vast complexity of the human experience is your armor against the algorithms of control. You are not a data point. You are a chaotic, deeply flawed, incredibly powerful anomaly. You are the variable that the spreadsheet cannot predict. Own it. Weaponize your humanity against the machine. The legacy of the Vietnam War is a heavy one. It is a scar on the psyche of the world. Let it burn in your memory as the ultimate proof that the smartest men in the room are often the most profoundly blind. In the balance of history, truth always outweighs logic. Data can tell you how many people died. Only humanity can tell you why it matters. Never confuse the measurement for the meaning. So, I leave you with a question. A question you must ask yourself every time you open your phone, every time you go to work, every time you vote. Who is writing the algorithm of your life? What is the surrogate metric you have been tricked into chasing? What is your personal body count? Are you sacrificing your soul to make the line go up? Once you identify the false metric, destroy it. Step out of the lab. Walk away from the maze. It is terrifying to live without the comfort of numbers, but it is the only way to live truly free. The system relies on your compliance. It needs you to believe in the illusion of efficacy. The moment you stop caring about the score, the game loses its power over you. You render the entire bureaucracy obsolete. This is the ultimate lesson of the Psyche of Power. True power does not lie in the ability to control every variable. True power lies in the wisdom to know which variables must remain wild, unmeasured, and deeply human. We dissect the darkness so you can guard your own mind. History is not just in the past. It is a psychological blueprint playing out right now. If you want to see the strings pulling the world, you have to look at the psychology of the puppet masters. Don't be the architect of a tragedy. Don't be the soldier blindly following a flawed metric. Be the one who questions the math. Be the one who protects the truth. If you made it this far, you are not here for entertainment. You are here to understand the architecture of control. Stay sharp. The machine is always learning. The spreadsheet lost the war, but the battle for the human psyche is still raging. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to wake up from the data matrix. I am your guide through the darkness of human nature. This is Psyche of Power. Until next time, question the data. Defy the algorithm. Keep your soul off the spreadsheet.